Hello, I'm Soycat and welcome back to the second channel geography video. This is Ellis Island series where I talk about geography and the world and stuff. And today I'm going to be talking about the United States of America. That's right, it seems to be the #1 request on this channel for me to make a video about America. Why haven't you done that, Soycat? You should do that, Soycat. But the truth is I actually did this once. I made a video on every one of the 50 states, but I privated it in the end because I got a state capital wrong and people tore me apart in the comments like, Soycat, how don't you know the state capital of every state? Why do you even... You know, it was like the angriest I've ever seen like comments get about something, and it's like, okay, Americans really protective about their state capitals, gonna make sure I memorize those before I even reference that. So in today's video, we're not talking about state capitals. I'm not even gonna reference the fact that states have capitals, because that's a bit of a weird thing by itself, but instead I'm gonna be talking about some of the weird geography points in America that I have wanted to talk about for a while, but have kind of been putting off. And yeah, we're gonna be talking about some of the really weirdities about state boundaries in particular, and then also it's gonna be like half that, but also half a rant about America. So as a as a European, but also as a British person in particular, a lot of the place names in the East of America are really quite frustrating, and maybe you're aware of this, maybe you're not, but in this video, I just wanted to go over why it is so frustrating, because, yeah, I have a little bit of a minor story to share of that. So yeah, let's talk about annoying place names, rant about America, and then tell you about some of the cool state boundaries that you might not have realized. So, yeah, hopefully you don't enjoy the video. First thing I want to mention, though, is actually to do with the name America. I'm probably going to call it America quite a bit in this video. If you're from the English-speaking world, if English is your native language, that probably isn't shocking. Like, the United States has the has the name of America. Like, that's just what we call it colloquially. However, Spanish speakers, Portuguese speakers, and people who believe that there isn't two continents, North and South America, get really either offended or confused when you call it America, because if you believe this is one continent, you call that continent either the Americas or just America, and that means you get the very confusing thing of like, wait, why are you calling this America? All of this is America. So some people get confused, and because in Spanish and Portuguese they just call the United States Estados, it's it's something like Estados Unidos, but they call it, they call it the country name in America in Spanish. Therefore, if like you're from Venezuela or you're from Argentina, it's really offensive that people call, your continent just like this one country, and there you go. Now you know the confusion, now you know the understanding, but in English, that's what we do. I'm speaking English right now. I'm sorry if that offends you, but like, I'm not doing it to be offensive. It's just what we say, okay? All good? Okay, United States of America, let's talk about why it's so annoying. And you probably think the first thing I'm going to rail at here is like, oh, do you know there's 3 states in America? New York, New Jersey, and New Hampshire? Wow, they're so lazy. Their biggest city is named New and then a British city. That's so bad, right? But honestly, I'm actually okay with New York, New Jersey, and New Hampshire, which, by the way, in case you're curious, give you some British history here. York is a really historic city in the UK, or at least it's got like a bunch of castles and stuff. It's one of the most visited cities in all of Europe. There's York in the UK over there. There is Jersey, which is technically owned by the UK in a really indirect way, an island just off the coast of France. And then Hampshire is a county in the UK. It's hard to show off, but it's this one here. It's the most populated county that isn't a city too. So there you go, fun fact, those are the 3 states that are named New, then something in England. But again, that doesn't bother me. Even the name New England, it's weird. It doesn't bother me because at least they distinguish between the New and the England. So let me tell you about the very first time I went to America. It was about 2 years ago, because Norwegian started flying from London to Boston. I think it's for £129, and I was like, yeah, sure, that, like, I'd love to go to America, and that's a price I can probably afford. So, yeah, I went to America, I went to Boston, and, it's cool to go to America for the first time, lots of issues, but, I got there, and I'm fine, I'm at, like, the station, trying to work out where to go, and, like, some woman comes up to me and is like, hey, do you know how to get to... And then she says, where I live. Like, my tiny town in the UK, it's like the 44th biggest town. She's like, how do I get to there? And I look at her dumbfounded for a few seconds, and I'm, like, thinking, like, she can't mean, like, she wants to go, I'm just gonna make up a place. Let's say I live in, Basingstoke. So it's just like, how do I get to Basingstoke, Toycat? And I'm like, what? I mean, you get, like, a flight that way and stuff. So I was confused. It took me, like, a second and a half to be like, oh, it's clearly somewhere here. I don't know, sorry, lady. But yeah, basically, everywhere on the East Coast has this annoying thing of just being named UK city. So for instance, Worcester is just UK city. Pretty much every place in these areas right here. I know it's called New England, but you got like Plymouth, you got like... By the way, Sandwich is a real British place, but you've got Sandwich, you've got just a bunch of places where they're like, what if we just call it the English thing, and it probably won't ever come up. And although that's kind of fine, like, oh yeah, probably when they made these names, it wouldn't come up, let me now tell you about the fact that the 3 largest cities in the UK by population are London, Manchester, and Birmingham. Birmingham hides behind the England sign there, but there's Birmingham, there's Manchester, and there's London. London's the biggest, then Manchester and Birmingham are like 2 and 3. And let's talk about the fact that pretty much every state in America, the majority majority of states have a Birmingham or a New Hampshire in them. That's right, Manchester, New Hampshire is actually the biggest city in the north of New England, apparently. That's a fact I learned. And it's like, okay, that's kind of cool. It comes in really important in the presidential race, the primaries, I think. And it's like, oh, man, we're going to Manchester, and it's just a famous Manchester to Americans. Confusing, if you happen to be from here. By the way, there's also a bunch of places called New London, like a bunch of them, but we'll ignore that because it's new again. But then if you look around, like the rest of the places here, you notice how pretty much every place around it has the exact same problem. Peterborough, Chesterfield, the majority of places, it seems, there's another Manchester just over here. Like, you can see Manchester on the same screen, like, oh, you can't see. On the same screen, literally, just over there, there's another Manchester, because why not? There's a place named after the most controversial, thing in the UK, Londonderry. They just call it this here. And by the way, in case you're like, oh, two Manchesters on the same screen, that must be a coincidence, right? Well, the funny thing is I happen to know, I don't actually know where it is exactly, but I happen to know there's actually one more, just in the same state, by the way, Manchester by the Sea. As you can see, another one. And although this is called Manchester by the Sea, the locals just call it Manchester. If you live in Boston, this is just Manchester, the suburb, and it's like, there is 3 Manchesters that close to each other. So if you type in Manchester, Google used to be really bad at this. In the UK, it would take you to Manchester. I think it would take you to Manchester, New Hampshire. You type in Birmingham, the UK, it would take you to Birmingham, Alabama. Because again, second biggest city. Also, as a huge example, one of the times I was dealing with a legal thing, the person was in Birmingham, Alabama, and I'm like, that can't be real. You can't be from Birmingham, Alabama. But it's true. And look at the city boundaries, by the way. We'll get into that later. But let's talk about American fun facts again. Let's get back into those. Because I said I'd give you some of those. I didn't just say I'd rant. So let's talk about the fact that a lot of American states have really, really weird boundaries. So for instance, the reason for this is because Virginia believed it extended all the way west across the continent. And because of that, they had to split it later. And it means they have a very straight line border along their south. And that means Kentucky is kind of made from former Virginia. It's a complex story. But the cool thing about that is because the line goes straight until it meets the Mississippi, the way they wrote the contract leaves this very weird vague thing where, again, the straight line's going across here, it cuts off where it hits the Mississippi, but then there's a bend which goes like this, which means this little thing right here is technically a part of Kentucky, and it's really hard to see unless I zoom out. But as you can see, there is an exclave of Kentucky found just over here. There's no way in and out without going through the states to the south, Tennessee if I'm not mistaken, and it's just one of those cool little things that you find in America. There's a lot of weird boundaries like that, in particular New York and New Jersey. If you don't know, New York, which is, for the record, America's biggest city, by pretty much any measurable metric, by population, gotta clarify that every time. The city of New York actually spreads a little bit into New Jersey. There's an island in the. It's really tricky to find actually. I'm gonna show my embarrassment on American geography. But there's an island right here, which is Ellis Island. I believe there's something to do with immigrants before, but now it's used for a thing. This part of it belongs to New York. There's a little enclave on an island that belongs to New York, and it means you have the really weird boundaries that look like this. And the rest of the island belongs to New Jersey, and it's just super, super strange. And actually, this is a really weird thing that American cities do that you don't see most other places. Pretty much all the cities in America, all the large cities of states, are found on the boundaries, the largest, I should say. So St. Louis, for instance, found right on the boundary into Illinois. I have a fun story about St. Louis too, actually, because long story, involves an American girl. Then Kansas City. Fun fact, Kansas City is not actually in Kansas, at least not most of it, because it's right on the boundary and it exists in Missouri mostly. So Missouri kind of has 2 states right at its edges, and connecting them means they've got the weirdest infrastructure of any state, really. You see this all the time with other states as well. And my point being is a lot of states have their things right on the border, and it's a really, really weird common thing. Louisville, for instance, look how close that is to the border. You cross the river, then you're on another side, and you can do that obviously with internal states. And the reason for that mostly is because the rivers of America, the Mississippi in particular, is one of the reasons it's so successful. They put boundaries there as well as cities, and you get this weird situation where you have cities and boundaries right next to each other. So yeah, going back into my rant, which I can do now, because while we're talking about Kentucky, which I believe we just were doing, right, I want to talk about the most ridiculous example of this, because Lexington, which is the second most populated city in Kentucky, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not 100% sure on that one. It's not important to my point though, so that's why I'm saying I'm not 100% sure. There's a place over here called Frankfort, which, funny name by itself, but then we've got this place right here, and you might recognize this place, right? Oh, yeah, that sounds familiar. That's Versailles, right? The Treaty of Versailles? Is that named after a place west of next turn. And the truth is, no, it's not. There's actually a lot of places with this name. I said it, but and the reason for it's famous because there's a treaty in France named after it, the World War I. Basically, it's to do with the Versailles, and like the place in America. Guess what they call this? Again, it's named after a French palace, the Palace of Versailles. What is there's a Palace of Versailles in France, when there's the Treaty of Versailles too. Guess what this is called though? Guess how this is pronounced? It's pronounced Versailles. And it's pronounced Versailles every single time it comes up in America. There's one in Pennsylvania, and going back to the rant there, a little bit ridiculous. They call everything Birmingham, and for the record, I could find like a bunch more examples of Birmingham and Manchester, and yeah, that's just something I wanted to bring up right here. There's also a bunch of just ludicrous examples, because again, half fun facts, half hate. So they have one of the few quad point borders in the world because it's an internal border, but there's still very few of these ever. There is literally a point where a quad point exists. It's almost impossible to find these in the world, wild, because you wouldn't ever do it that way. But there is a 4-point monument that meets right here, where you can, technically have your arm in 4 separate states at once. Not common thing to do at all. And then minor hate again, because I'm going to St. Paul very soon, actually, for convention. And, St. Paul is just found here. And then guess what? Just to the south of St. Paul, there is a place called West St. Paul. And the westmost boundary of St. Paul is not more west than St. Paul. It's not even really the whole place more west than St. Paul. Like, the average of St. Paul seems to be further west than West St. Paul. And, West St. Paul is literally in the south there. But it's called that anyway, because why not, right? And actually, while we're talking about silly things, Virginia and West Virginia, I know it's because they split, for the record, like West Virginia split, and Virginia doesn't want to recognize it. But it should really be called East Virginia and West Virginia. The reason for that is because, again, they split and they just haven't changed their name. But West Virginia, actually, if you look at their state boundaries compared to Virginia, is not the most point of Virginia is more west than that of West Virginia. And West Virginia goes significantly more north than Virginia. So really, it should be either Northwest Virginia or North Virginia. But, West Virginia is a little bit misleading. Also, if you go into this little panhandle here, I guess you'd call it, you'll notice there's a place called East Liverpool, which, I mean, like, it's... do I need to do this anymore? I don't think I do. I hope you all enjoyed this video. I'm going to Andorra. I'll record some form of video about countries, about airports there. I hope you all enjoyed this. And if you live in Minnesota, I don't actually know anything about Minneapolis, St. Paul, besides their twin cities. Tell me a fun fact in the comment down below. I don't hate you, America. I love you so much that I've been there a bunch of times. But your place names, they get on me every now and then, and this was me laying it out. So I hope you all enjoyed it, because I'll see you all next time. Second channel, don't care. Goodbye. Oh, I pressed the wrong key on my keyboard. I have F10 to start and F9 to end, and I press F. That's why you hear the key press, because I got a mechanical keyboard. Sounds like this, right? But I accidentally pressed the wrong one, and now it's awkward because I thought it was over. I'll press F9.